Some lines feel unbreakable, until one glance makes everything unravel. I arrived home shortly after 7, still wet from the pool and sticky from the afternoon heat that clung to my skin like a lingering regret. The corridor was infused with the scent of detergent mingling with a subtle metallic aroma, reminiscent of aged keys or unblemished injuries. The gym bag slipped from my shoulder, landing on the parquet with a soft thud. Silence was what I longed for. After workouts, solitude had transformed into my sacred ritual. A warm shower, a cup of tea, and a blissful hour of silence. As I pivoted toward the kitchen, voices reached my ears. His voice resonated. I paused for a moment, attuned to the cadence of words that had long been absent from my ears. A more profound iteration of the boy's, brimming with confidence, exuding a carefree spirit, and imbued with the rich texture of youth still unaware of its boundaries. He leaned casually against the fridge by the counter, a backpack resting at his feet. His hair seemed to have grown a touch longer than I recalled, illuminated and chaotic. His arms exposed and etched with the sun-kissed hue of one who lingers too long in the embrace of the outdoors. His grin spread across his face the moment our eyes met. "I'm staying for a while," he declared, devoid of any remorse, as if this were the most commonplace of announcements. My husband turned around, his face aglow with youthful pride. "Have I neglected to mention something to you? The college is undergoing renovations, leaving him without a place to stay until the middle of the month. I imagined it would be enjoyable, reminiscent of times gone by." Delightful point. The word struck my heart with the weight of a stone. I managed to conjure a smile, yet an unsettling sensation crept over my skin, as if an intruder had unwittingly crossed the threshold of my private sanctuary. He had outgrown the innocence of boyhood. It became evident right away. His gaze held steady when it encountered mine. They remained steadfast, excessively lengthy, excessively straightforward. I stepped into the shower, silence enveloping me as I closed the door behind. The water flowed with a fierce heat, yet I remained untouched by its warmth. My body operated with a certain mechanical precision. Hair cleanser, wash away, fabric for drying. Yet my thoughts were strewn about like scattered pins. I made an effort to push aside the memory of how his voice had resonated. Subdued, self-assured, perhaps even entertained. I reminded myself to keep my composure. He would take refuge in the guest room for the night. He would be occupied. He was merely passing through. The focus was never on my own self. As I entered the bedroom to change, I chose something I hadn't worn in a while. Something softer, a delicate piece adorned with slender lace and a front clasp familiar, yet oddly distant. I found myself uncertain about the intended recipient. He had always been present. In his childhood, he dashed through our corridors with bare feet, indulged in ice cream that left his fingers sticky, and addressed me with a nickname reserved solely for the young. Yet now he carried himself with a nonchalant confidence that was foreign to his youth. The passage of time had altered the contours of his shoulders, the manner in which he adorned a t-shirt. His posture was striking, expansive and flowing, unrestrained in movement, and the manner in which he gazed at me, neither with disrespect nor with innocence. That night, I found myself lying awake far longer than I had intended. Beside me, my husband was already lost in a gentle snore, the sound of familiar melody that wrapped around me like a warm embrace. Yet slumber eluded me. I paid attention. In the distance, the sound of footsteps echoed through the hallway. Software, calculated. I rolled onto my back, my gaze fixed on the ceiling above. They moved past my door, wavered. Then it went on. I rose from my slumber and padded softly to the kitchen, using thirst as my pretext. I approached the fridge, my hand reaching for a bottle of water that I found myself lacking the desire for. As I shut the door behind me, he stood there, waiting. In the doorway, half enshrouded in shadow, his hair still glistening from a recent shower, he wore a t-shirt that embraced his chest with an almost inviting familiarity. Silence enveloped us. His gaze lingered momentarily on my exposed legs. I had neglected to put on any pants, merely a lengthy tee and the gentle caress of silk underneath. "Do you find yourself waking up during the night?" he inquired, his tone now hushed. It is only when the house is not empty, I remarked. Once more a smile graced his lips. That same youthful essence cloaked in a more mature guise, something observing me with an unsettling intensity. I shall endeavor to keep my voice at a moderate level. Your voice is quite subtle. I have the capacity to be. He uttered it with such nonchalance, as if it held no significance at all, yet he maintained his gaze. I pivoted, strode past him in silence, and sensed his presence trailing behind me like an electric charge. As I nestled back into the embrace of my bed, I drew the sheet up to my throat, despite the warmth that enveloped the room. The following morning, I noticed him observing me from across the kitchen table, while I spread butter on a slice of toast. He held my gaze without a flicker of hesitation. My husband was engrossed in his phone, completely unaware of his surroundings. I savored each bite, letting it linger before swallowing, then cast my gaze downward to my lap. A disquieting sense lingered in the air as the rules morphed with alarming speed, leaving me uncertain about the identity of those orchestrating this transformation. The morning unfolded much like countless others, serene, inviting, and intriguingly uncomplicated. A morning that feels both leisurely and charged, where the air vibrates with an unspoken anticipation, as if the day holds secrets yet to unfold. I glided through the kitchen as I always did, barefoot, my hair still damp, cinching my robe tighter than needed. The aroma of toast mingled with the sharp scent of citrus cleaner, while the sky outside the windows hung thick with sunlight. He lounged at the kitchen table, legs splayed casually, reclining in the chair with a relaxed ease that only youth can truly embrace. At ease, unrepentant. His shirt clung to his skin, the fabric a touch too sheer, the sleeves rolled up, showcasing the sculpted contours of his forearms. He was absorbed in his phone, yet as I stepped in, he lifted his gaze, holding it a moment longer than mere courtesy demanded. He offered a smile. I did not. An unsettling quality lingered in the air, masked by the facade of normalcy that enveloped everything. The sound of my husband's voice resonated from the office at the end of the hall, inquiring about the whereabouts of his glasses. I replied without shifting my gaze, my tone unwavering, as though my skin hadn't just recoiled from that glance. I occupied my time with various activities, the vibrant colors of fruit, the comforting presence of bread, and the gentle hum of the refrigerator fill the space. I found myself in search of an object to grasp, to sever, to purify. He approached and stood next to me, silently taking the heavy bag from my grasp and transporting it to the counter as if it were of no significance. Yet, I became aware of the way his arm lightly grazed against mine, neither fully intentional nor completely by chance. Together, we found ourselves strolling to the grocery store. He suggested nonchalantly that he needed some fresh air, expressing a desire to stretch his legs. My husband remained engrossed in his screen, merely offering us a smile and a casual wave as we departed. It was an unanticipated excursion, yet there was an undeniable quality to it that heightened my self-awareness. I observed my posture, the subtle shift of my sunglasses, the deliberate crossing of my arms. He strolled with an air of assurance, his hands tucked into his pockets, discussing the changes to the college, the professors he found unappealing, and the music that was unfamiliar to me. I absorbed his words with only half my mind, the other half captivated by the rhythm of his movements, the delicate sound of his footsteps echoing in harmony with my own. I sought to remain untouched by it all, yet I was. It filled me with a sense of awareness that I found utterly distasteful. As we approached the checkout, he swiftly grabbed the bag just ahead of me. His hand brushed against mine once more. Once more, not intentionally, yet again not entirely innocent. Upon returning home, I ventured into the pantry as he began to unpack. A palpable shift in tension had commenced, now external, now vocal. I sensed it lingering between us, as delicate as the finest pane of glass. It offers a glimpse beyond, yet there's an underlying tension, a whisper of fragility that suggests it might shatter with the slightest jolt. And then unexpectedly he uttered those words. "Your shoulders possess a remarkable beauty." I pivoted in his direction, my eyes fluttering as though the words had not registered, yet I had. He remained absorbed in his task, pouring cereal into a bowl as if it were merely another remark. He remained stoic, devoid of laughter or a hint of color in his cheeks. He simply uttered it, as if it were an undeniable truth. It was a thought that had lingered in his mind for some time, and now he chose to let it escape into the atmosphere. Much like steam rising into the sky, I chose not to reply. I was unable to. I exited the room not out of anger, but from uncertainty about my actions if I lingered. In the dim light of the bedroom, I lingered before the wardrobe, caught in a moment that stretched longer than it ought to have. My fingers lingered above the hangers, brushing against lace and cotton, hues I hadn't embraced in months. My hand lingered on an object that was pale and silky, adorned with a delicate trim, exquisite in its essence, yet devoid of purpose. Excessively gentle for slumber. I slipped into it effortlessly, fully aware of the reasons behind my choice. Upon my descent, I found him by the window, cradling a cup of coffee in his hands. He remained oblivious to my entrance. I slipped past him, my hand extending toward the mug that rested next to his. Our hands met. Neither of us made a move to depart. He gazed at me then deliberately. A palpable change lingered in the air, a prelude to what was about to unfold. He advanced, and in an instant, before words could form on my lips or I could draw a single breath, a moment passed between us, one that words dared not enter. There was no pressing need. It lacked aggression. It was silent. His lips grazed mine with a gentle assurance, as if he was fully aware that I would not pull away. It was gentle and deliberate, and the absence of doubt rendered it more perilous than anything else imaginable. There existed no pressure. There is no assertion, merely a query. My unwillingness to resist had already spoken volumes. He was the one to step back initially. Not a single word was uttered. I turned and left. I chose not to run. I left the door ajar as I stepped out. In the quiet of the upstairs room, I perched on the edge of the bed, my gaze fixed on the floor, lost in thought for what seemed like an eternity. The warmth lingered in my mouth. My fingertips quivered ever so slightly, yet I maintained their position against my thighs to find some semblance of steadiness. I found myself at a loss for words to capture the essence of the feeling. Perhaps a sense of shame, yet intertwined with a feeling that teeters on the edge of awakening. As the evening drew to a close, my husband leaned in to kiss me good night, and I returned the gesture with warmth, in a manner that requires no manual intervention. Silently, my mind wandered to another time, revisiting a different moment. A unique approach. I found it impossible to meet his gaze. That night, I reclined in bed, my gaze fixed on the hallway beyond the narrow crack of the door. The darkness enveloped everything. Quiet, yet a part of me lingered, anticipating the sound of footsteps once more. The bracelet was diminutive, fragile, and certainly not my own. It rested in the heart of the box, exuding an air of reverence. A delicate chain of gold adorned with a petite heart-shaped charm, capturing the morning light and scattering it across the countertop in shimmering flickers. My husband stood beside me, extending the box with the gentle warmth of someone presenting a comforting cup of tea. The memory of his hand grazing my elbow lingers vividly in my mind. His face bore a smile, authentic, filled with pride. Perhaps it carries a hint of romance. I discovered this in your vehicle, he remarked. I wondered if perhaps it had slipped your mind. A moment lingered, imperceptible to him, before I extended my hand and grasped it. I gazed at the bracelet, my eyes unyielding, refusing to blink. My mind raced to rearrange the fabric of time and the essence of things. This bracelet was unfamiliar to me. I had most definitely never purchased it. My vehicle had been stationed at my residence, secured, yet it wasn't always my doing. I expressed my gratitude, my voice slightly elevated, while my fingers, betraying my nerves, struggled with the clasp. He assisted me in putting it on. His hands, warm and familiar, held an unspoken complicity. A smile graced my lips, excessively broad, overly rehearsed. A smile I hadn't worn in ages. He pressed his lips to my cheek before departing for his customary Saturday tasks. In solitude, I found myself in the kitchen, my gaze fixed upon the bracelet that now adorned my wrist. The charm danced with each subtle movement of my arm, as if it had a heartbeat of its own. It lacked the essence of a true gift. It had the weight of a revelation. This was something he had purchased. He is not my husband, him. On the eve prior, I recalled my bag, momentarily abandoned on the couch after my late return from a stroll. I had stepped away to freshen up, and he was the final soul lingering downstairs. The box must have been placed in the bag by him. In a curious turn of events, my husband stumbled upon it before I ever had the chance. Uncertainty washed over me, caught between the urge to laugh and the instinct to panic. It was steeped in a sense of cruel irony. My partner, the unsuspecting herald in a contest he was blissfully unaware of participating in. As I crossed the threshold onto the back patio, the world outside beckoned. The sun hung high in the sky, rendering the tiles scorching for unprotected feet. I lingered in the cool embrace of the shade, where the ivy curled gracefully, allowing the gentle breeze to tousle my hair. It was at that moment that I laid eyes on him. He perched on the low brick wall at the garden's edge, one foot resting on the ground while the other tapped idly against the brick. A book lay upon his knee, untouched and waiting. His gaze was fixed upon me. They didn't let their gaze fall to the bracelet, yet I was certain he noticed it. Silence enveloped us. It was unnecessary. The burden of the gold that lay between us surpassed the weight of any spoken word. He rose gradually, elongating his limbs like a feline, and approached me with a deliberate grace. Take it slow. Not with intent. Simply. Near enough to sense his essence electrify the atmosphere. Yet he remained silent. He strolled by, his arm lightly grazing mine as he passed. It was a gentle caress, minimal communication. Yet the echo of his lips remained on mine from days past. In that moment, the unspoken recognition resonated more profoundly than any words he might have uttered. Once back indoors, I occupied myself with trivial endeavors, shifting the fruit bowl, neatly folding fresh towels, gazing into my closet for an extended moment, and then altering my attire without any particular motive. I wasn't putting on a costume, not in the traditional sense, but I certainly took notice. A delicate neckline, exposed limbs. The bracelet, resting on my wrist, emanated a warmth, as if it were responding to my very skin. As the afternoon waned, my husband came home bearing groceries and shared the news that we had received an invitation to a dinner next week, a gathering at my friend's countryside retreat, belonging to his mother. The irony enveloped everything, a heavy shroud that stifled the air. I nodded and uttered the right sounds, my mind already conjuring the sensation of the walls of that house closing in around me, the dialogues I would need to pretend, the looks I would need to steer clear of. As the evening wore on, I observed from the window as he wandered through the garden, phone in hand, lost in conversation, chortling with delight, at ease, a wholly transformed individual in the presence of others. Yet I could still sense that change when his eyes met mine. The unspoken tension lingers, a palpable reminder of his silence regarding the bracelet, an absence of apology that speaks volumes. For it was not a blunder. It was deliberate. Perhaps it was a matter of calculation, or perhaps spontaneous. I was unaware. The distance that once defined us had transformed in ways I could not ignore. Free from the weight of uncertainty, the atmosphere was electric, buzzing with the tension of a present that felt utterly out of place within these walls. As the evening settled in and I prepared to retire for the night, I carefully unclasped the bracelet and placed it gently upon my nightstand. I gazed at it for what felt like an eternity before finally extinguishing the light. The room seemed to envelop itself in an unusual darkness, despite the door being ajar. The atmosphere thickened, reminiscent of an impending tempest for which I was unprepared. From afar, I caught the sound of his bedroom door creaking open and then shutting softly. Gently, no footsteps trailed behind me, though I had anticipated none. Not at this moment. Yet I was aware with an inexplicable certainty that nothing would remain a mere accident from that moment on. The journey to her home stretched on, allowing silence to envelop us like a thick fog. As my husband hummed softly to the radio, I found myself gazing out the window, observing the trees rush by in a tapestry of early autumn golds and weary greens. Midweek, the invitation had arrived. "It's an annual dinner," she remarked. "A time-honored custom? Laid back. Invite the guys, allow them to reconnect." My husband expressed his satisfaction. He cherished the memories that these events evoked. Since the moment her name reached my ears, I had been wrestling with the tempest brewing within my chest. She was the one who brought him into the world, a companion of mine for many years. We had exchanged an abundance of experiences. I cradled him in my arms as an infant, and I had taken the time to send him birthday cards over the years. Now, I found it nearly impossible to meet her gaze without a creeping sense of shame coiling tightly around my ribs. The residence lay hidden at the terminus of a winding gravel path, enveloped by towering hedges and the faint aroma of smoke wafting from a far-off chimney. It appeared unchanged, just as it always had. Somewhat weathered, somewhat proud, similar to her. She welcomed us at the threshold with her signature broad smile, planted kisses on both my cheeks, and enveloped me in her embrace, radiating that effortless vitality that was uniquely hers. I embraced her in return, stiff and unyielding. He had arrived ahead of time, stepped out from the back patio, a bottle of wine cradled in one hand, sunglasses perched in the other. His hair was moist, as if he had just stepped out of the shower. He embraced his mother first, then gave my husband a hearty clap on the back, his grin lingering just a heartbeat longer than expected. Then he cast his gaze in my direction. Silence prevails. There was no smile. A mere acknowledgement. A mere flicker of acknowledgement. My heart thumped once, a heavy resonant pulse, before settling back into its measured cadence. The evening unfurled as it always has. Refreshing beverages enjoyed on the porch. The sound of laughter reverberated through the space, echoing off the walls. Ancient tales, jokes that linger in the shadows of memory, amplified narratives of unforgettable high school evenings. I found myself seated between my husband and a woman who seemed to belong to a distant memory, and occasionally, I sensed his eyes upon me. In summary, as delicate as a whisper, it rests upon the nape of my neck, always lingering in that perfect balance, too fleeting to dismiss yet never quite sufficient to validate. The dinner table buzzed with noise, the wine cascaded effortlessly, while her culinary creations remained as sumptuous and decadent as they had always been. Yet, I hardly experienced any flavor. The food had the texture of cardboard as it lingered in my mouth. My attention wandered to the glass before me, the condensation sliding down akin to the tingling feeling coursing through my spine. Once dessert was savored, guests ventured back outdoors. A flickering flame danced in the backyard pit, drawing everyone close, wrapped in blankets and cradling steaming mugs. I lingered, feigning the task of clearing away the dishes. He emerged 10 minutes later, barefoot, cradling an armful of wood destined for the fire. In the dim light of the kitchen, we found ourselves alone for the first time that evening. He set the logs down next to the fireplace, then stood up straight. I found myself rinsing a plate, even as the water had long since lost its warmth. "I didn't think you'd wear it," he said softly, nodding toward my wrist. It dawned on me that I had slipped the bracelet back onto my wrist without even noticing. I shut off the faucet. It was unwise to leave it in my bag. "You didn't dispose of it," he remarked. I chose not to reply. The silence that enveloped us took hold, intertwining itself within the floorboards and settling into the crevices of the walls. He advanced with measured intent. Neither too near nor too far, but just right. His voice dipped, teetering on the edge of playfulness and cruelty. "Do you believe she would recognize it?" That evening, I locked eyes with him for the very first time. They exhibited no trace of arrogance, only warmth, exasperation. A lurking threat, silent and poised, lies just beneath the surface. "She would never accept it," I remarked. "Not a soul would." "Precisely," he responded. He strolled by, his fingers grazing the surface of the counter, refraining from contact. He is merely leaving a path of consciousness in his wake. The flames outside illuminated the faces of all present with a warm golden glow. He entered the circle, collapsed into a lawn chair next to one of the younger cousins, chuckling at something I couldn't quite catch. My husband beckoned me to join him, patting the seat beside him with a warm invitation. I settled in, pulling the blanket closer around me, taking a sip of cider that carried a hint of ash. He sat opposite me, legs extended, head thrown back toward the sky as if he were unburdened by the weight of the world. Yet, his knee brushed against mine under the blanket, only just, a solitary beacon amidst the shadows. It remained hidden from all eyes. Not a single soul took notice, and still it was the sole sensation that enveloped me. As the evening wore on and the last of the guests began to depart, the fire flickered softly, casting gentle shadows around the room. My husband leaned in close and murmured that we ought to linger a little longer, to embrace the night. The hour was late. She possessed an abundance of rooms. All around me, others were partaking in it. I gave a slight nod. Naturally, it was logical. All things consistently fell into place. From the exterior, we were led to the guest room located on the upper floor. A serene nook adorned with worn curtains and a mattress that offers an unyielding embrace. My husband drifted into slumber within moments, his breaths deep and rhythmic. One arm sprawled across the blanket. I settled by the window, attuned to the soft murmurs wafting in from the porch. At that moment he came into view, beyond the confines of four walls, engaging in solitary smoking, shirt partially unbuttoned, illuminated by the glow of the porch light. He gazed up at the house, and for an instant, I was convinced our eyes had locked in silent recognition. Yet, he did not raise his hand in greeting, remained still. He remained motionless. Anticipating, I remained still as well. However, I left the curtains open. The stairs groaned softly under my bare feet as I made my way down, each step taken with a careful, hushed intent, reminiscent of a child tiptoeing into forbidden territory. A change had settled in the atmosphere of the house. Excessively silent, overwhelmed by that charged weight that lingers before a tempest or a treachery. My husband lay peacefully asleep upstairs, curled on his side, blissfully unaware of my departure from the bed. He would linger in that state for hours on end. He invariably acted that way following a glass of wine. The dimly lit hallway downstairs was bathed in the gentle glow of a nightlight, its soft illumination casting shadows on the walls. Most likely her, ever mindful of comfort. The kitchen light lay dormant, yet the back door stood ajar. I approached it, compelled by an unnamed force, guided solely by the quiet pull of unresolved tension. He stood outside, propped against the porch railing, the final ember of his cigarette flickering momentarily in the night before he cast it aside. He remained unperturbed as the door creaked open, not even glancing back. I ventured into the night, drawing my robe closer around me, even as the air held a gentle warmth. We lingered in that moment, words unspoken, enveloped in a silence that resonated rather than settled. He spoke, his gaze averted. "I thought you weren't coming down." "I hadn't intended to," I replied. Yet, we remained averted from one another. The dwelling that lay behind us was in a deep slumber. Crickets stirred in the darkness, their gentle chirps providing a subtle backdrop, akin to courteous allies. The grass exuded a damp, sweet aroma, while the air was infused with the mingling scents of wood smoke and salt. I ought to have retreated indoors. It would have been wiser to bid good night and walk away. Instead, I moved in a bit closer, neither with intention nor with flair. Sufficiently so, sufficient to sense the warmth emanating from his skin, to observe the cadence of his breath. At last he shifted his gaze in my direction. His expression was inscrutable, neither eager nor smug, simply assured. "I'm not trying to hurt anyone," he stated. I nearly chuckled, not with bitterness or mockery, but gently, like a breath too weighty to contain. "I'm uncertain if that holds any significance now." He extended his hand toward mine, without a moment's pause, devoid of any formality. His palm was coarser than I had anticipated, radiating warmth, undeniably tangible. I remained steadfast. Time slipped by, first one moment, then another, and soon we were in motion. The guest house stood across the backyard, the old detached studio once utilized by her father for painting, now merely a tranquil shell filled with the futon and storage boxes. We strolled there side by side, deliberately, akin to those who had already leapt from the edge and were witnessing their descent unfold in a languid, drawn-out manner. He turned the key in the lock, swinging the door open and gesturing for me to enter. The air was tinged with a subtle blend of dust and the crisp scent of lemon polish. A solitary lamp flickered feebly in the shadows of the corner, volumes piled high against the wall, cozy throw blankets draped casually, a modest desk tucked away. I found myself frozen, uncertain of where to place my hands. He glided by, placing his phone on the table before pivoting to face me. I had a premonition of what was to come, even before it unfolded. For days it unfolded in fleeting glances and heavy silences, in moments that carried an undeniable weight, forever tainted by an innocence that was never truly there. Yet this time it was neither a fleeting glance nor a mere brush of skin. It was a kiss, distinct from the first, devoid of exploration, lacking in questions. This one carried significance, purpose. It moved with a deliberate pace, yet lacked any hesitation. His hands found their way to my waist, drawing me near, and I surrendered without hesitation. I was unable to do so. My body responded before my mind had a chance to intervene. I returned his kiss completely this time. All the dormant fragments within me, those that had lain silent for years, those that had been dulled by the monotony of routine, the constraints of politeness, and the weight of obligation, suddenly stirred to life in unison. His lips pressed against mine, warmth radiating from his breath onto my cheek, and in that moment, I was oblivious to notions of right or wrong, merely the flavor of him. It was solely the sensation of his body pressed against mine. Suddenly the power flickered, a low hum reverberates through the walls, the faint crackle of a fuse igniting. We separated just enough, our breaths unsteady, foreheads nearly brushing against one another. And then darkness enveloped everything. In the depths of darkness, I found myself attuned to his presence, my eyes gradually discerning the familiar contours of him, recognized now through the intimate language of touch rather than the clarity of sight. Neither of us stirred. I was unaware of the duration we lingered in that moment. Moments. Decades. We were enveloped by the quietude. In that moment I found myself whispering, the reason eluding me entirely. We must return. His voice carried a hushed timbre. I understand. Yet neither of us stirred. As we stepped out of the studio, the sky began to lighten, revealing the first whispers of dawn. The birds remained still, yet to awaken from their slumber. We traversed the grassy expanse in quietude. Silence suffices. Silence reigned, devoid of apologies or the clumsy humor that often seeks to bridge the gap. It was merely the serene acknowledgement of a moment that had transpired between us, one that could never be reclaimed. I quietly returned to the guest room, careful not to disturb my husband, slipped under the covers as if everything remained the same. Yet the imprint of his touch lingered upon my skin. The memory of that moment lingered like a silent echo. The scent of smoke in his presence lingered softly on my robe. He would depart with the dawn, returning to campus, to whatever semblance of normalcy he feigned to uphold. I would remain here. As I folded the laundry, I would respond to emails, stealing a moment to kiss my husband on the cheek as he brought me my morning coffee. Yet I was aware of something now, a revelation that remains etched in my mind. I shall await the next occasion, and I was certain he would as well. The subsequent days melded into one another, heavy with a silence that offered no comfort, instead weighing down like oppressive heat on skin gasping for air. We made our way back home the following morning, enveloped in silence, our thoughts unspoken. My husband was in high spirits, invigorated by the fresh countryside air, delighting in the old jokes he couldn't help but share repeatedly. I responded with nods and fleeting smiles, engaging in the subtle dance of a wife who had enjoyed restful sleep, satisfying meals, and retained only the lingering aroma of wood smoke and the echoes of laughter. That day I steered clear of mirrors, not due to an inability to confront my own reflection, but rather a reluctance to do so. He remained silent as expected, returned to the familiar cadence of the home, much like a piece of furniture you had long since adapted to colliding with. He arrived and departed, leaving no words behind. With headphones draped around his neck, His shirt perpetually bears a hint of wrinkles, while his hair maintains an effortless perfection in its own delightful disarray. He had grown more subdued in his demeanor, observed in silence yet offered no words. It lingered just within reach, grazing the skin, yet it chose not to halt, prepared the coffee just as I preferred, yet departed before I could savor the initial taste. That silence, indeed. It was not a matter of avoidance, a vow postponed, a boundary that neither of us dared to traverse once more. Not at this moment. 2 nights later, my husband unveiled a delightful surprise for me. On a Tuesday, the world unfolded in its usual rhythm, unremarkable in every discernible aspect. In the kitchen, I found myself engaged in the task of rearranging the spice rack, not due to necessity but rather to give my hands a sense of purpose. As the door swung open, he stepped inside, a bouquet of flowers in hand, not from a store but unmistakably gathered, flawed, petite, redolent, lavender, eucalyptus, and a solitary sprig of rosemary. My initial reaction was one of doubt. Next came the weight of guilt. He offered a shy smile. I envisioned us enjoying dinner in this place. Only the two of us. It was not a day marked by celebration for us. It is not a birthday. There appears to be no apparent cause, and maybe that was the most heartbreaking aspect. The endeavor resembled a quest for salvation. Even he was at a loss for words. I acquiesced naturally, laid the table with elegant cloth napkins, uncorked the wine we had been saving for a special occasion. He played jazz from a playlist that had slipped into the shadows of memory. The speakers emitted a soft hiss, a whisper of sound born from their long neglect. The dinner was delightful. He had requested it uncooked, attempting to arrange it on the plate in a manner that suggested a touch of homemade charm. I feigned ignorance. I allowed him to pour the wine. I inquired about his profession. He inquired about the pool, my skin, and whether I had been more diligent with my moisturizing routine lately, something he asserted he had observed. A smile graced my lips. I chuckled at all the appropriate moments. Yet, beneath the surface lingered the pain of something lost. His hand extended toward mine, bridging the distance that lay between us on the table. I offered it freely. The warmth enveloped the surroundings. Recognizable, I lingered in anticipation of solace. The only sensation that registered was the stark contrast. He leaned in, brushed my cheek gently, and then pressed his lips against mine. I shut my eyes. The movement was soft and soothing. Exercise caution, the kiss of an earnest effort. In the depths of our minds, we seek to recall the essence of our former selves, attempting to piece together a puzzle he was unaware had been broken. I returned his kiss. Yet my body was aware, understood the distinction, understood the temperature, the pressure, the rhythm, understood the realms in which desire thrived and where it fell silent. As the night deepened, he approached me. I allowed him to proceed. I allowed him to make contact with me. I allowed he reached for me in a way that reminded me of something we once shared. He had cherished for years, a form he once knew well but I no longer recognized. With heartfelt appreciation, I allowed him to softly utter my name. I allowed him the opportunity to attempt. Yet, I found myself unable to meet his gaze. Never. I concealed my thoughts beneath the heavy layers of the sheets, burdened by his presence. As the moment came to a close, I offered a gentle kiss on his shoulder before making my way to the bathroom. The mirror remained steadfast. I gazed at my reflection as if I were examining the features of a stranger. The warm hue of flesh, a delicate trace of mascara. The mark near my collarbone was something I wished he hadn't seen. I activated the faucet, allowing the frigid water to cascade over my wrists, across my fingers that had not held on in return. I glimpsed the drawer nestled next to the sink, unveiled it. My fingers glided across the delicate lace. Crimson, gentle, woven with strands of gold. It wasn't the sort of attire I donned for my husband. I shut the drawer with a soft click, returned to the comfort of my bed. He lay in slumber, one arm draped over his face, his breaths deep and unhurried. I glided under the sheet, settling in beside him, quiet. My skin tingled with a vibrant energy. not in light of the recent events, yet from what was left unsaid. In the chamber down the corridor, another man remained restless. I sensed it just as you can feel the gaze of someone observing you from the other side of the street, even if you aren't seeking. I drew the blanket up closer around me. I curled inward, searching for sleep that wouldn't come, anticipated the arrival of sleep, fully aware that it would elude me. The following morning, the atmosphere within the house seemed denser, as if the very walls had soaked up all the unspoken words lingering in the air. My husband departed at dawn. Gatherings. An urgent matter has arisen. He pressed his lips to my cheek before departing, calling me babe as if it held significance. I nodded, waved, and gently closed the door behind him, lingering for a moment longer than necessary. The stillness that followed was palpable and heavy. With a deliberate slowness, almost as if performing a sacred rite, I made my way into the kitchen. He stood there, casually leaning against the counter, his bare feet touching the cool floor, a shirt that was slightly wrinkled and sleeves rolled up, exuding an effortless charm. He appeared unfazed by my presence. He didn't feign ignorance of his anticipation. He remained silent. He was under no obligation to do so. A novel kind of silence enveloped us in this moment, free from doubt, free from hesitation. The stillness seemed to grant a sense of freedom. I brushed by him to fill the kettle. As I turned the knob, a subtle tremor coursed through my hand, barely perceptible to anyone else, yet distinctly felt by me. He extended his arm to grab a mug, and in that fleeting instant, his chest grazed my shoulder. It was merely a trifle. It encompassed all that one could desire. "I'm leaving," he declared, the weight of his words hanging in the air after a prolonged silence. I stood still, caught in a moment of disbelief. My dad called for a chat next week. He is eager for me to begin the internship at an earlier date. He spoke with a straightforwardness that resembled a weather report, yet his gaze remained fixed on me, steadfast. I cast my gaze downward, pretending to be absorbed in the bubbling water. "I hadn't anticipated your permanence," I remarked, with a calmness that belied my thoughts. "I understand," he responded. The ensuing silence was unlike any that had come before. It was more acute, more conscious, as if two individuals were recognizing the conclusion of something that had yet to be defined. I placed the kettle down, grasped an unnecessary spoon, and took a moment to compose myself. "I had a feeling this would come to pass," I murmured softly. "What is this?" "That it would be inconsequential what I desired." He remained silent, yet I sensed his gaze fixed upon me. The evening unfolded much like any other. Our paths barely intersected. I laundered clothes that were already clean, organized the medicine cabinet, and mindlessly scrolled through an infinite stream of nothingness on my phone, all the while attempting to ignore the fact that he remained upstairs, absent from my view. As the clock struck midnight, I ventured into the backyard. The atmosphere was gentle, refreshing. The sky stretched above like a vast canvas of deep ink devoid of stars. I lingered by the garden fence, arms folded, head tilted upwards, attempting to find solace amidst the turmoil within me. He materialized behind me, akin to a shadow I had conjured. "Struggling to find rest?" he inquired. I did not make an attempt. He approached, measured and calm, neither hurried nor uncertain, simply nearer. "You don't want me to leave," he remarked. It was not a question. I glanced over at him. The porch light cast shadows that deepened the contours of his face, lending it an air of mystery. His expression remained serene, yet his jaw was taut. I confessed that I was uncertain about my desires. "This is what you desire." He extended his hand, making contact with mine. Only a single time. Sufficiently ample. I remained steadfast. And just like that, we found ourselves on the move once more. Neither hurried nor concealed. As we moved through the house, we traversed the living room without a word. The hallway light danced with a subtle flicker. All was shrouded in twilight, pulsating alongside our breaths. We arrived at the stairs and came to a halt. The atmosphere surrounding us became taut. We ascended in silence, mindful of the boards beneath us, avoiding any sound that might betray our presence. The door shut gently behind us, the soft click resonating in the silence, somehow louder than it ought to be. This time we acted without a moment's pause. He leaned closer, and for a moment time forgot itself, as though he had been patient for far too long. His hands remained silent. They recalled. I allowed him to continue. I had no desire to. However, I did withdraw. Merely a touch, merely a glance in his direction. I whispered, "You're going." Indeed, he pressed his lips against mine once more. "Take your time. Then let it not carry the weight of farewell." Yet he did not. We lingered in his room until the windows gleamed with the light of dawn, until the outside world began to stir from its slumber, until I was compelled to revert to the version of myself that could whip up breakfast and wear a smile effortlessly. As I quietly extricated myself from his bed, I noticed he was already awake, positioned on his side, observing me with that familiar, inscrutable gaze. Feeling a sense of disappointment, innocent, simply present. Completely, I hesitated at the threshold. He never requested my presence to linger. He was not obligated to. The truth lingered between us, as essential as breath itself. This would not be the final occurrence. Not if either of us had any say in the matter. The hours that followed that night crept along, burdened and unwilling to move swiftly. The morning light seeped through the blinds of my bedroom as it always did, casting its familiar glow on the same furniture, the same cream-colored walls, and the same framed photo above the dresser, an image I hadn't genuinely observed in years. As I quietly returned to bed, my husband remained in a deep slumber, his breath a gentle rhythm, the back of his hand resting close to my hip as if fate had placed it there. I averted my gaze from him, fixating on the seam of the pillowcase until it faded into obscurity. On that morning I remained silent. I glided through the house, a mere whisper of presence, elusive and intangible. With meticulous care, I folded the laundry, poured juice into glasses that remained untouched, and wiped down surfaces that sparkled with cleanliness. My husband remarked on the weather, the news, and the reality that we were running low on paper towels. I nodded at all the appropriate moments, yet my thoughts spiraled back to the events of the previous night. I recalled the way his breath had gradually eased against my shoulder, how the world beyond the room had faded into something surreal, insignificant. For a fleeting instant, perhaps merely a handful of seconds, my mind had ceased its relentless chatter. No calculations, no consequences, only the sensation of his hands on my back, the way he whispered my name as if it were his own. In the stark clarity of daylight, there was no room for such candor. He sidestepped me, not overtly, not harshly, but with a subtle accuracy that felt far too deliberate to be mere chance. He lingered in his room for extended periods, took his phone calls outdoors, dined at varying hours, yet his essence remained, permeating the house like the wisps of smoke from a candle recently snuffed out. Every time I stepped into a room, I could sense his lingering presence, as if he had just departed moments before. On that night, slumber eluded me. By 11, the house lay in stillness. My husband's slumber was as profound and unaware as ever. As I reclined on my side, my gaze fixed on the ceiling, I found myself counting the seconds that stretched between the sporadic sounds of cars gliding by in the distance. My limbs throbbed, not from fatigue, but from the weight of restraint. The trace of his skin lingered on mine, not in a tangible way, but deep within, a memory woven into the very fabric of my nerves and breath. At the stroke of one, I surrendered. I quietly extricated myself from the warmth of the bed, mindful of the sheets, and padded softly into the hallway, my bare feet meeting the cool floor. The chill of the floor kissed my feet, while a narrow beam of light spilled from beneath his door. I paused at the threshold. I refrained from knocking. I chose not to enter. I lingered in that moment, attuned to the sounds around me. Silence enveloped the scene. There is an absence of motion. It was merely that line of golden light, casting an air of fragility over everything it touched, more delicate than one would expect. Then I averted my gaze. I made my way back to the kitchen instead. I filled a glass with water, yet it remained untouched. Seated at the table shrouded in darkness, one hand lay upon the smooth, cool surface of the wood, while the other cradled the glass, as if its presence could lend form to the swirling thoughts in my mind. In that silence, time unfolded in peculiar ways. At last, the sound of footsteps reached my ears. Unhurried, reckless, simply ponder. He stepped into the kitchen bare-chested and unshod, his hair tousled from the remnants of slumber. Our gazes locked in an instant, and for a fleeting moment, we remained perfectly still. He traversed the room with a deliberate slowness, each step measured, before finally taking a seat in the chair across from me. The table that lay between us seemed less a mere surface and more a formidable barrier. Silence enveloped us. As I cast my gaze upon the bracelet adorning my wrist, yet present, it remains incorrect. In 2 days I will be leaving, he murmured softly. I gave a slight nod. I was aware. Will you bid farewell? I'm uncertain. I responded. He leaned in, resting his elbows on the table, fingers intertwined. I noticed the faint scar by his wrist, the way his knuckles tightened as he restrained himself. His expression remained a mystery, shrouded in ambiguity. It lacks chill. Not gentle. Simply vigilant. Here it is. I hadn't anticipated any of this, I remarked. I didn't either. The stillness that ensued was the truest expression shared between us. It contained all the unspoken words between us, all that we were unable to achieve. The dread, the yearning, the awareness that a fracture had occurred, one that neither of us possessed the means to mend. I was the first to rise. He chose not to follow. As I strolled by, his hand extended, grazing the fabric of my sleeve for a fleeting moment before falling away. A question posed, then retracted. Upon returning to my room, I took my time to undress. Each piece of clothing was folded with meticulous care, as if tenderness could reverse the past. I gazed into the mirror, contemplating my reflection. My physique remained unchanged. Yet it was not for me. I slipped into a new pair of pajamas. I gathered my hair and secured it neatly. I completed the ritual of brushing my teeth, executed the routine with the precision of a sacred ritual. As I settled back down next to my husband, he shifted ever so slightly. He moved closer to me in his slumber, his arm draped comfortably around my waist. Recognizable, cozy, weighty. I shut my eyes. Yet my thoughts lingered in the kitchen, facing someone who recognized the side of me that remained hidden from everyone else. Sunday came and went, devoid of any fanfare. The sky hung gently, a muted shade of gray, a watercolor of uncertainty that mirrored all I was striving to suppress. The streets beyond were hushed. The city lay quiet, as if it too felt the change in the atmosphere. I traversed the house as if I had already departed, my fingers grazing familiar items with the dispassion of one marking the passage of time. The walls were aware. The rooms had borne witness to an abundance of silences this week, rendering them unable to maintain their neutrality. As I strolled past his door, I caught sight of him in the midst of packing. I pressed on undeterred. I remained silent, yet I caught the gentle sound of the suitcase being zipped up, the soft rustle of shoes finding their place tucked away with care. The serene weight of emotion intended to last forever. It felt surreal. Not the sort of reality you prepare yourself for. It was akin to witnessing the conclusion of another story. My husband had envisioned a stroll, a laid-back affair. It was an activity we had not engaged in for many months. He referred to it as a reset. We agreed to meet for coffee. Perhaps one could linger by the lake for a while. His voice carried an overly cheerful tone, perhaps a touch overly optimistic. It was as if he felt an unseen disturbance, grasping at the intangible, attempting to mend it with instruments that had long since lost their purpose. We strolled leisurely through the park, the leaves starting to transform, crisp and tinged with orange at the tips. The grass remained summer-soft beneath my feet, yet the air had shifted. He discussed the various possibilities for retirement, concerning the act of refreshing the bedroom's paint. We ought to plan a trip in the near future. I inclined my head in acknowledgement, shared insights at every turn, yet my thoughts wandered with each stride. At some point on his journey he grasped my hand, not as if we were unfamiliar, not in the manner of a lover. just as a man clings to something he questions whether he still possesses. I've come to realize that my focus has wavered in recent times, he uttered. Labor. Pressure. Yet, I fear the thought of losing what we have. His words took me by surprise. Not due to their substance but rather because of their timing. In the wake of all these moments that have passed. In the wake of all the minor missteps and unnoticed hesitations. At last, he had uttered words that transcended the mundane concerns of groceries or the faulty garden light. I refrained from replying right away. It seems I too have fallen prey to distractions, I declared. He clasped my hand with a tender touch. We can rise above it. Should we both make an effort? My gaze fell upon him. Truly observed. I truly believed he was sincere. He desired to mend what he perceived as flawed. Yet he remained unaware. Not quite, not entirely. I found myself uncertain about whether I truly desired it to be fixed, or if I were even capable of such a thing. We found ourselves perched on a bench beside the shimmering water. The surface lay like polished glass, mirroring the sky as if poised for a moment of disruption. The ducks glided slowly across the shallow waters, while the sound of a child's laughter echoed in the air nearby. Everything felt utterly ordinary, exquisitely, achingly ordinary, and I felt an overwhelming urge to scream. Upon returning home, I made my way directly to the bedroom. The door was closed. I perched on the edge of the bed, my gaze fixed on the suitcase that had remained untouched for years. I left everything unpacked. A letter was not penned by me. I simply bided my time. As I stepped outside, I noticed his car already parked in the driveway. He leaned against its side, arms crossed, sunglasses resting atop his head. Not a suitcase to be found. No discernible expression was present. I assumed you would want to bid farewell, he remarked. I found myself uncertain about whether I ought to proceed. Uncertainty lingered within me, a reluctance to depart without the sound of your voice echoing in my ears once more. We lingered in quietude. I never requested him to remain. I never requested his return. I refrained from asking him anything, yet, just before he swung the car door open, he strolled over, retrieved an item from his back pocket, and extended it forward. A modest envelope, unlabeled, illumination, to be revisited at a later time, he remarked. When you cease the facade. In that moment a moment passed between us, one that words dared not enter. Not upon the lips, upon the cheek. And it unraveled me more than anything else ever could. He slid into the car, turned the key in the ignition, and reversed out of the driveway, his gaze fixed ahead, unyielding. I observed him depart until the vehicle vanished from sight, swallowed by the embrace of the trees. It was only at that moment that I finally unsealed the envelope. Within lay a photograph, a relic from the past, captured by the serene waters of the lake. I found myself in a moment I couldn't recall, yet there it was before me, chortling with delight. Strands of hair falling across my face. Golden rays dance upon my collarbone. In the corner of the frame just out of focus, he lingered there as well, gazing upon me. A note lay hidden behind the photo, only 5 words. Your presence made me feel vibrant. I held back my tears. Not at that time. I stepped back inside the house. The door was closed. For the first time in weeks, I found myself sitting alone in my room, unconcealed, refusing to wait, genuine and unfeigned, merely in a state of stillness, vibrant,